All right, good morning. My name is Scott DeLong, and I really wanted to thank Sharon Armstrong for allowing me the opportunity. Been waiting about 6, 7 months to be able to do this, and I'm kind of excited about getting in front of this group and talking a little bit about what we do here. I am a business owner. I've been a business owner since probably 35 years now. 3 different businesses, exited 2 of them really successfully, and this one was kind of my retirement business, which is it has to do with executive coaching. We teach courses, and then I facilitate strategic planning retreats and team building retreats. So it's a wonderful world that I live in. I get to hang out with really smart people. They allow me to ask a few questions, get out of their way. I get to hear everything that they're talking about and learn everything that they know. And then at the end, they pay me. It's like really it's a cool gig. So I love this work. And I've just finished a book called Transformational Leadership Theory, Practice, and Principles. It'll be released the 1st of January. And that's really what this webinar is about, the contents of that book. We won't be able to go into high level because I'm going to try to keep this at 45 minutes. I do have a doctorate in leadership studies. I have a master's in leadership development. And both of those were earned at an accelerated age. I didn't start going back to school till I was in my 50s. And it was really interesting being taught by people half my age. It was a cool deal. So this topic has to be on transformational leadership. And it was most theories come from the university settings, right? So the theory of transformational leadership comes from a guy named James McGregor Burns in 1978. And then Bernie Bass forwarded that thought process on what transformational leadership is. And it's really a combination of 4 things. And I've added a 5th for my practice. So ideal influence. And that has to do with respect and trust, earning respect and trust, high ethical standards. And not to say that charisma doesn't play a part in this, because it does. So those with charisma, it helps them get to this place. But even without, the high ethical standards and earning respect and trust is part of that. Inspirational motivation. Daniel Pink talks about this in his book, Drive. And it is to inspire rather than to motivate. The difference between inspiration and motivation is either it's intrinsic, it comes from within, and can we inspire that, or can we motivate people? And motivating people is really easy to do. Carrots and sticks. We can stop beating somebody and they will stop it, and they will stop the behavior, or we can pay them extra and they will do that behavior. The problem with motivation is without the carrots and sticks, it ceases to work. People stop doing the activity that you're looking for them to do. Oh, I got to admit more people, sorry. Intellectual stimulation, that has to do with growth and challenging people, giving them opportunities. People call it empowerment, but it's really about growth and challenges and challenging people to be more, and because they want to be more. And then in individual consideration, the difference there is talking about equity instead of equality, getting people what they need, meeting them at their place and getting them what they need. The one thing that I think both Bass and Burns didn't talk about, and this is a big part of leadership, is the creation of teams. You know, they focused really highly on the individual consideration, but they didn't put in play how that interacts. So I've added teams, the creation of teams and the development of teams to my practice of transformational leadership. What's really interesting about these leadership theories is we are just now getting to them, right? In the last 5-10 years, it's still a command and control world out there. You know, you've got the great man theory of leadership, and it's command and control. Do what I say, do it like this, and you'll earn your paycheck. And there's more and more that was really prevalent in the industrial age. And it actually created the formation of unions is really why that happened, is because of the abuse that happened with that. But it is still prevalent in society today. And these transformational, authentic leadership, servant leadership concepts, they're 45 and 50 years old. It amazes me that we're just now getting to it and focusing on it. Though I look at commitment over compliance. It's really easy to get compliance for people. If I have power over them, I can get them to do what I want them to do. What I'm really looking for with my team is to get commitment on the idea. And there's some concepts we'll talk about a little bit later on how to get that. Inspiration over motivation, we already talked about. Effectiveness over efficiency. Business has lived off of efficiency. Effectiveness includes not only efficient, but I would trade the efficiency for effectiveness any day, because effectiveness means getting the job done. And part of our job as leaders is to create future leaders. And if we're just worried about efficiency, we are not thinking about the future and the future of the organization as well. And then we talked about equity over equality. Equality, there's nothing wrong with equality. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the women's movement, 40, 50 years ago was really worried about being equal. And I think that having a level playing field is a great thing, but equity means getting people what they need to survive and thrive and do all of that. Let me admit a few more people here. Sorry about that. Everything is based on trust. Trust is the major factor. It is the cornerstone of any positive relationship, and it's the foundation for being an effective leader. If they don't trust you, you can only get compliance because of fear, working out of fear. So trust is the thing. It's a really easy concept to talk about. It's a really easy concept to ignore, but trust is a big factor that needs to be worked on. It needs to be developed. The old days, trust was developed in one way, which is continue to do the things that you say you're going to do, and people will eventually trust you. All right, makes sense. So what I call that is delivering on the promise. But we've created a theory that's called the circle of trust. It's not the Fokker circle of trust. It's a little bit different. So it starts with respect. And this is the type of respect that is not the one that I grew up with, which, my father would say, hey, respect is earned, it's not given. Absolutely not. Respect is given. Respect for human dignity. This is the respect that I'm talking about right now. Now, it certainly can be earned as well. But what we're talking about here is the respect for human dignity, that you have value, and then I need to start in respect with that. The next step comes from Stephen Covey, which is listen to understand, as opposed to what most of us do most of the time, and we listen to reply, or we listen to defend, or we listen for our own reasons. But what I'm talking about here is to understand the other person and where they're coming from and what they're thinking and their impression. Sharing from experience. This is a concept that I learned very late in life, and that is it came from a group called Entrepreneur Organization. And what they did is they had something called Gestalt Language Protocol. What this protocol suggested was that we don't give advice. You can share from your experience, but when you want to hear the other person's story, and then you can share something from your own experience without telling someone what to do. The best way that I learned how to do this was take the word should out of my vocabulary. I have no idea what you should do. I've had a similar circumstance, and here's what I would do, right? That's the sharing from experience. But I don't have your experience. I don't have your background. I don't have your problems. I don't have your future relationships. I don't have any of those things that you have. So for me to tell you what you should do is a pretty arrogant concept. I really have no idea what you should do. And then the fourth thing, and this is the deliver on the promise, which is the way that we've always earned trust. Yes, it is the fastest way to break trust, is to break your word, to not do what you say you're going to do, but delivering on the promises is required. And our theory suggests that as simple as 3 times through that cycle, you can develop a relationship. Anyway, it's a faster and deeper way to build trust by going through that process. And it's an active participation role. So I say communication is everything. Well, communication and trust is everything. And the problem with business today, and I see it, is that we have got into this efficient method of communication. Efficient meaning as fast as possible. And I'm going to tell you this, it doesn't matter what I say. It matters what you hear and how you interpret that. That's what communication is. We've developed a model called the communication hierarchy. And we can all recognize that email is probably the most widely used communication method that we use today in business. Overused, I'm going to say. We'll talk a little bit about that. But what the communication hierarchy suggests is that the more potential for conflict there is. Now, conflict I'm going to define as just a difference of opinion. It's not a battle, it's not a war, it's just a difference of opinion can create conflict. The higher the potential for conflict, the higher up the communication hierarchy that you can go. You need to go to do that. Face-to-face is the most effective. If we can get in front of people and talk, we can see body language, we can see not just the facial responses, but the body language. And, I tell people all the time that, if I'm on Zoom, and the reason I ask you to put your camera is so I can look at your faces and see your reactions, right? But all I can see is just the facial reactions. And I will key on some of those things. I'll see who's fading off and kind of encourage them back in the game, or I might see some emotion that sparked when I said something, the eyebrows raised, right? We can look at body language on Zoom, but we get face to face, I can read your soul. I can see what's in you. So the higher the potential for conflict, the higher up the communication hierarchy we need to go. So face-to-face is best. Video conferencing is next. I didn't used to believe this because I thought people were uncomfortable on screen, but the pandemic has helped us get better at this. But it is better because I can read that body language, or at least the facial. Below that is a phone call. Just pick up the phone. Really simple. Below that is email. Now, I still am a fan of email. I think it's overused, but here's why I like to use email for a couple of different purposes. The first one is to memorialize a conversation. You and I get on the phone and we talk about something, whatever problem, and we've agreed on whatever. A week and a half from now, memories fade. Interpretations of what we each said might have been slightly different, and we didn't confirm that necessarily, right? We just had a call and we thought we were both on the right page and going forward. I like to memorialize those conversations with an email. Hey, Sharon, thanks for the call. Here's the things that I'm going to agree on, and here's the things that you said you would do, and we'll get back together next Friday, right? If I've sent that, now she has a chance to reply and say, oh, nope, that's not what we agreed on. Here's what we agreed on. Well, pick up the phone and tell me. Here's what we agreed on, right? We can communicate that and get that done. But if she doesn't reply, that's the memorialization of the conversation. That's what we agreed to. That's what we're going to go do. I like email for that. And I'm a big push on it. What I don't like email for is, hey, what do you think about X, Y, or Z, right? To get a dialogue going through email. The problem with email is this. One of the problems, the biggest problem that I see, emails are almost always read with a negative slant. So a positive email is going to be read in a neutral tone. So unless I'm sending some smiley face emoji, which is not appropriate in most business cases, right? You're not going to tell I'm joking or whatever. You're going to see whatever I say one layer below my intended reason for sending that. So if I'm trying to send a positive email, you'll see that as a neutral one. If I send a neutral one, you will see that as a negative email. And if I put something all in caps, then you know exactly what I'm doing, right? So that's one of the problems with email. Another advantage that you could do with email, if there was a non-confrontational issue, let's say, for instance, that you asked, you're my marketing person, and say, hey, what are the PMS colors for your logo? Bam, here's some facts, boom, send them out, non-controversial. We're not going to have a discussion, debate over it. It's just, what are they? Here's what they are. You can use email for that as well. But for most things that we use in business today, it is overused and it gets us in trouble. How many emails have you written or written that came out completely different than what you thought you were saying, right? The person's interpretation of it was just completely different. So memorializing the conversation or non-judgmental kind of facts. And then this one's arguable, text and IM, and some people are going to say, well, Slack is better than email, and there's some debate about that, right? But in the texting world, or tweeting and 140 characters and all, it's really not a great form of communication. It's a one-way form of communication. It's not great to get into discussion or dialogue. I might send you a text if I say, hey, remember, we're meeting at 12:30 at Chili's, or whatever it's going to be. You might get a text from me in that manner, but certainly not something that should be a discussion. Only one thing lower than a text or an email in my mind, and that is to assume. It's the lowest form of communication out there. Now, I can assume I know what you're going to think because I know you pretty well, and I may be right. Good chance I'm not. Good chance I don't get the nuances. So take that communication hierarchy and think about it the next time you have a conversation with, or need to get into a conversation with somebody. There's some sort of a disagreement. Higher up potential for conflict, the higher up we need to go. Next is power. Power or influence. Thinking about that. The destructive forces of power, and this is where we get back into the command and control. And there's a lot of work on this. So you've got positional power, and then you've got personal power. I don't think there's anything wrong with the personal power. I do think most of the time there's a problem with utilizing your positional power. Coercive power is the ability to fire somebody. Reward power, the ability to give them a bonus. And the legitimate power is hierarchical. It's I'm the CEO, therefore I can say, and that sort of thing. And sometimes you have to use some of that power. But I think developing your personal power, informational expertise, and referent power. Referent power is, for those who don't know the word, is access to others, right? So if I can introduce you to, like Sharon has referent power with me. She introduces me to this group that gives her a source of power with me. Right? So influence and power. Influence is a little bit different. Robert Cialdi from Arizona State University talks about the 6 different categories of influence, reciprocation. Now, here's the problem with influence, right? It can be used for good or evil. These are tools that can be used in a manipulative manner. The transformational leadership philosophy talks about high ethical standards. So I'm just going to suggest right now, even if we sat here and taught you all of these, I'm not just going to explain them really quickly, but if we taught you all of these, you could use them for bad things if you want, and you can get what you want almost always by using these tools. It's manipulative. Don't use it. Reciprocation is if I do something for you, you'll want to do something for me. Commitment and consistency, that theory says that, that if people start down a path, they will continue down that path. And they'll continue to utilize those same tools. You get them to say, salespeople do it like this. You get them to start saying yes, 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 yes. Then you hit the close and you want them to say yes again. Commitment and consistency. Social proof is that if everyone else is doing it, it must be good. Maybe I should join. iPhone comes to mind when I talk about that. Authority, because I had some expertise and authority in the subject, people will want to be around you and do what you want them to do. Scarcity, you see this all the time. In fact, there's some outlawed tactics in the retail industry based on the theory of scarcity. You are not allowed to say going out of business, having a going out of business sale if you're not going out of business, right? Scarcity works. Hey, hurry up and get this or else you'll miss the opportunity. That's what scarcity is about. Unity, and that's just with being with others. It's very similar to social proof. And then liking. This one is much more powerful than you might want to give it credit for. People want to be around people they like. They want to do the things that those that they like do. So transformational leadership has some likability involved in it. That's with that idealized influence, to be able to influence because you like being around, right? This category, emotional intelligence, almost everybody I know, in fact, I deal with a lot of leaders, right? And almost everybody I know thinks they've got a handle on it. They think they've got emotional intelligence nailed. And in fact, I'm going to suggest I did the same. I thought, no, I've got this one. I've got this. I know what's going on, right? And what we're good at is recognizing and adjusting to the emotions in others. We can either match them, meet them. We can manipulate to get. We can influence. We're pretty good at looking at the emotions of others. What most of us are not very good at is recognizing how our own emotions are influencing our behavior, and therefore the communication that's happening between us. I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm whatever, and I just expect people to deal with it, right? So it's not just the recognition of those emotions, but it is also the management of those. So this emotional intelligence became big back in the 70s, I'd say. And a couple academics, Salve and Mayer, had this ability model of emotional intelligence that created perceiving emotions and then reasoning with those emotions, understanding emotions and managing. Daniel Goleman, in his book Emotional Intelligence, which he related to IQ as well, which the academic world has kind of debunked that EQ is as important as IQ. It's important, but it doesn't relate nearly equal. And he talked about self-awareness and self-regulation. The part that most of us are missing, our self-awareness, the ability to monitor, not monitor ourselves. And when people think about self-regulation, they think about controlling emotions. And I changed that because I think we can manage our emotions. I think it's a much healthier thing to manage the emotions. And there's tools that we use to teach on how to manage those. And a lot of those just have to do with mindfulness, right? Breath work, yoga, meditation, things like that can help us get into a space where we can afford to manage rather than try to control. What I tell people is that if I ask this question a lot, do you know the difference between a pipe bomb and a tea kettle? They're both built the same, but a tea kettle has that little vent hole on the top that allows the steam to explode or escape rather than build up and explode. Pressure is going to happen to all of us. Understanding where those release points are and how to utilize those is key if you want to get into emotional intelligence. Goleman also put in motivation, which was a strange thing to put in emotional intelligence, but I like it. And I like it because business people are motivated people. They have things that they need to do. They need to get things done. And the self-motivation becomes a big part of managing, not controlling, managing your emotional intelligence. And then the social skills, and that has to do with dealing with others, right? Huge part of this, the practice of empathy. We don't do it enough. I see that the majority of the people on this call are female. You are much better at it than we are. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be misogynist, but women are better at this than men are. We've historically grown up that way. The nurturing, caring, we were taught to be tough, right? Don't cry, don't do all that kind of stuff. And we were taught wrong. I'm sorry, that's not the way to deal with people. Empathy is a big deal. The difference between empathy and sympathy, just want to go into that really quickly. Empathy is understanding the feelings or attempting to understand the feelings of somebody else as opposed to owning those feelings. So here's the problem with sympathy. And there's some reasons for it, right? But sympathy, the biggest problem that I see is that I absolutely don't want anyone to be feeling sorry for me. And I don't think many of my friends do either. I don't think any of you want people feeling sorry for you. And if we utilize a sympathy framework and feeling sorry, we are therefore putting ourselves above others. Using empathy puts us on an even plane with them. So it's just a thought about that. So it's a really good subject to look up and try to understand a little deeper. There's sympathy, which is feeling sorry for somebody. And I get it. There's sympathy cards, right? Somebody passed away, a sympathy card's probably the appropriate thing to do. But when we're talking about the other steps of empathy, there's emotional empathy, which is an attempt to understand. And again, remember, I don't have your experience, I don't have your background, I don't have your relationships. I will never fully understand, even if I've had a very similar situation. I will never fully understand, but it's my attempt to understand you from where you're coming from. Cognitive empathy, pretty simple. It's I got the feeling, I understand it from an emotion, from a hierarchical or intellectual level, right? And then the empathic concern, it is showing that concern for others. Here's a caution with empathy. In fact, there are categories of employees that are taught not to be empathic. First responders, doctors, nurses, not so much, but people that have to deal with that kind of trauma, cops, right? You don't want to get into that. Therapists, right? You don't want to own their emotions. You want to understand their emotions. Owning it can get very taxing on you. right? You just can't be empathic with everybody all the time if you really dig down and own. This is why I try to talk about understanding where they're coming from as opposed to feeling it for them and with them. There will be some times you're going to feel it with them. I get it. But there's a distance that can be created so that you can understand and deal with it versus owning it and getting sunk in by it as well. All right. And then empathic practices, that's really simple. It's just understanding you. Just most of them are about asking questions. There's a line that I really like to use. Ask, don't tell. Ask how someone's doing. Don't assume, don't tell them, right? Ask somebody what to do, what they think we ought to do rather than tell them what to do. It works both in interpersonal relationships as well as a business relationship. So if there's anything you get out of this, ask, not tell. Fastest way to build all of this transformational leadership. So empathic practices would be listen and understand, listen without judgment. Sorry, went too far. Don't make assumptions. Allow for feelings. This is something that the business world has not done very well, right? Don't cry in the workplace. Don't get angry in the workplace. Feelings are real. I delivered a keynote to an organization, and it was on communication. And as we were talking through this, it seemed to go pretty well. About 2 weeks later, the president of the organization called me back, and he got an email from one of his employees, one of his managers, thanking him for bringing in someone that would talk about the word feelings in the workplace. They're real. We have them. Why would we avoid them? Why would we ignore them? They actually can get in the way or help us if we understand these things. Yet we're so busy working on this efficiency thing that we forget that we're dealing with humans. The line that I like to use, when people are working on their systems and practices without dealing with their people first, they're wasting their time and their money. And these people have feelings. It's okay. Now, do I want to sit there and spend 8 hours working on someone's emotions from the day? No, we have things we have to do as well, but recognize that the feelings actually influence how the work that people are going to be able to get down to you. And the closer you are to being able to understand these human beings, the better the work that they're going to provide for you. All right, this was a big one for me. I grew up in this old school command and control, men don't cry world, right? And the thing that I found, and I'm not going to tell you how I found it, that's subject for a later conversation, but I found that being vulnerable is the most attractive quality I can have. Not physically, those days are gone, but vulnerability attracts people to you. And Brene Brown talks about this a lot, and she talks about don't overshare, right? So you got to be cautious where you are and where the relationship and how that's developed. But being vulnerable, letting you know that I have needs. I'm the CEO here, right? We're talking about what we need and all of these things. And I say, listen, I don't know everything. Here's where I need help. Those kind of comments will draw people towards you rather than push them away. I just got through with a retreat with a leader that said, well, I know this and I know that. And I know, like, you're not going to build your team that way by having this Messiah complex, being the strong leader. Everyone expects me to know this, and that's wrong. That is wrong. You want to draw people in, show some vulnerability. It's probably, I start the book on the chapter in my book. I start the chapter on this, is that this may be the most controversial chapter in the book. And we talk about vulnerability. Why do I say that? Because really it was written by an old white guy, written for old white guys, right? That's what this book really started out being. And I wanted to tell them they're wrong. Open up, listen, learn, and you will move forward faster than you ever thought possible. Vulnerability, humility, empathy. Start there, lead there. Here's some things positive things that vulnerability does for you. It affirms your humanity. It requires humility. It cultivates empathy. It's all about trust. Actually, the definition of trust, the word vulnerability is in there, to be vulnerable to the actions of another. It's all about trust. It goes hand in hand with courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable. And it's a requirement for growth. If I know everything or present, I know everything, who's going to help me learn? I believe this strongly. Even if you were the smartest person in the room, we are smarter than me. Vulnerability will help get the information to you. There's a lot more to this. Obviously, this is, in a quick, 32 minutes, you're not going to get the depth. These are the categories that I like to talk about in this transformational leadership process. In a few minutes after the questions, if there are any, we're going to go and tell you about some ways that you can get more information. Again, book's not going to come out till January, so I'm not selling a book here. But I do want to hit on the topics, and I'd like to, and then I'll tell you about that in just a minute. So what questions are in the field? I don't think I have access to my chat. Yes, I do. But what I'd like for you to do, if you had any questions on any of these things, any of these concepts, or things that you think are missing, or why didn't you put this in, open floor right now. Go ahead and unmute yourself and jump in and ask a few questions. I'm here for you. Anybody? It's good to be first. There are questions out there.
I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, thank you so much. Such an interesting presentation and very thought-provoking. I have a question about vulnerability, and I often think about, it's kind of a combination of being vulnerable and sort of leveling the playing field, so that when I'm working with someone, even if I'm, technically in a power position over them, because they're somebody I supervise, but I try to create as much of a collaborative experience as possible, so that it feels collaborative, even if technically, I'm in a position of power. So, but sometimes sometimes I feel like, as a woman, I give up too much power in an effort to level the playing field. And I know you mentioned like writing the book for men who need to take a step down because they're used to leading from a position of power. But I wonder if you could talk about, as a woman who's used to being disempowered, perhaps taking less of a step down so that you don't lose your power in an effort to work collaboratively. Okay, good question. So I can't speak from a woman's point of view, but I have actually most of my clients doing the coaching are women. And part of the problem was that back when I was growing up, right, in order to succeed, women kind of had to act like men in the workplace, right? And be strong, be powerful, be this, be that. And you got categorized, and I hope not to be offensive to anybody here, but you got categorized as either, soft and wimpy or the B word, right? That's just what, we didn't give you the fair treatment. And I think that what you were taught to climb the ladder, or what you felt like you had to do in order to climb the ladder and be tough and not be, soft and all of that kind of stuff, I think is wrong. I think there's so many advantages to femininity, right? So the nurturing culture, all of those kind of things are so much better than what we've done. And women are much easier to be drawn into than men are historically. We're tough, we're strong, we have these shields up and all of that. So when I talk about being vulnerable to minimize your power, what I'm trying to get the thought process is to equalize the power in the room. There are definitely power differences. Maybe they're men, women, maybe they're big, small, maybe they're CEO versus manager. But if you want to get the most out of people, what you want to do is try to equalize the power in the room at the time. Vulnerability is a way to do that. If you have more power than the other person, showing a little vulnerability will help bring it down. there's a concept called psychological safety. I don't know if folks have heard of that. Amy Edmondson has done a lot of work on this. Timothy Clark has done work on this as well. And psychological safety is a very simple concept. It is the ability for the others, and it's usually talked about in a group, but I think it happens one-on-one as well. The ability for the other to feel comfortable that they can say what they need to say without fear of reprisal. And reprisal could be something as simple as an eye roll, right? It could be something that puts the other person down. So I think that vulnerability, you being vulnerable, allows the other people to feel safe. If you get too vulnerable, then you may not be safe. If too vulnerable too quick, right? You may not be safe. People can take advantage of. But here's the thing that I believe. These methods and these things that we talk about in the courses that we teach work 95% of the time with 95% of the people. Not overnight. This is not like flipping on a light switch. Okay, I'm going to all of a sudden be vulnerable and therefore everyone's going to come to me. It's more like a dimmer switch. Right? A little bit at a time, just start turning up the dial a little bit, getting people used to it. One of my favorite Dr. Phil's phrases is, we teach people how to treat us. They are used to us in a certain manner. And if we go 180 degrees from that manner, they're just going to be confused and they're not going to feel safe at all anyway. So it's more like dialing up the dimmer switch instead of just flipping a light switch. But I think that if you have the power, more power than the other person, and you can try to equalize that, and it might not be dropping your power, but by raising them. Whatever we can do to equalize that, you're going to get more information from that and more information to share. So is vulnerability, do men have to work at it harder than women? I think so. That's my opinion. I had to work at it harder, right, in order to get to that spot. But I also found that when I did, people didn't take advantage of me. And why do I say 95% of the time it works? Because the studies show that between 1% and 5% of the world has antisocial personality disorder. Sociopaths, psychopaths, and narcissists, right? We know some of those folks. I'm not suggesting being vulnerable in front of those. The narcissists are difficult to figure out because they're charming, right? They act like they care. They don't. You'll find out they don't. Okay. Hopefully they got it. Karen, I see your hand up. You got a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have my camera on. I've got backlighting issues.
Well, it's a beautiful picture anyway. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you. This has been a really interesting presentation. I took a lot of notes, which I don't usually do on webinars, so kudos to you on that.
Yay!
I did have a question or two about your communications hierarchy, and I don't know if it's really a question so much as a comment.
Okay.
Your comment on the emails not being good for controversial topics, and I understand what you mean by that in the sense of sometimes it's easier to just have it face to face and talk it through, especially if it's a big, complex kind of a thing. But I do think there's a place for that, because sometimes, like, if you know that you're dealing with somebody who is not a good listener, who's the type of person that listens to prove you wrong or cuts you off, and you know they're going to cut you off before you can get to the end of your thought, then the email can actually be much more helpful. And it can also be more helpful if you're the type of person that gets flustered or very emotional when you're talking, and having the time to write it out can help you to avoid saying things you don't want, you know you shouldn't say, but they kind of come out in the heat of the moment. So I think that's another good one. And then the third thing is, and this is from an inclusivity perspective, people with either hearing or voice disorders can really appreciate the use of email as a communication tool, as it can be easier for them to talk.
Yeah, I can't argue with your third point, but the first two I can. And when I say argue, I mean not tell you you're wrong, is saying, hey, there's another way of looking at it. So one of the things that I like to do is reframe issues rather than, I don't think anyone's ever wrong, right? There's a reason that we say the things that we're going to do, but here's how I like to reframe it. The first one is that if you're dealing with someone who doesn't listen, well, those are the kind of people that we need to get into courses like this, right? For them to understand the value of that listening. And the people that you're dealing with, need to start teaching those folks that this is an important aspect of our collaboration. The problem with sending conflict through email is it's going to be read with that negative slant. And it's going to turn into an escalation almost always. I think this, you think that. We just keep going back and forth, and we keep trying to up the ante, and we keep trying to win the battle. What we teach is trying to understand others because we are smarter than me. And I don't know who you're talking about, but that individual is not as smart as you and him together, you or her together, whoever that might be. And I think that collaboration, communication, and dialogue happens in person, whether it's face-to-face, on the phone, or a video chat. So that's my argument to that. The second portion of it is that you want to build a relationship, we don't do it over email. Now, if you don't want a relationship with somebody, you just want to get your point across, go ahead. But I'm talking about developing relationships, which is what all transformational leadership is all about. In fact, any of the progressive leadership styles, transformational, authentic leadership, servant leadership, facilitative leadership, it is about developing relationships. All human relationships require trust. If we don't have trust, then we use whatever tools we need to do and whatever power we need to do to dominate. And email might be one of those, right? We might just be and do it this way. But I'm going to suggest that if you want to build a better business, then you build better relationships. If you want to build better relationships, email may not be the tool for that. On the less vocally abled folks, I don't have an argument for that. You're right. If there are speech impediments, if there are hearing loss, things like that, maybe email could be used in those situations. But I'm going to say, in fact, I probably need to change my presentation for that, because that wasn't a point I had considered, and my fault for that. But I think effective communications is what we're talking about. And again, the more chance for conflict, meaning just a difference of opinion, and I don't want to turn that into a real conflict or a real battle, the higher up the ladder I would go.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And if you don't mind, I have one other question. Sure. That your comments spurred, your answer spurred. You mentioned transformational leadership, authentic self, and there were a couple of other ones. Mm-hmm. And I know you're focused on transformational leadership, but I guess my question is, how different are those models from each other? Are they more or less the same thing with nice different terms?
So we've got a tool here that we use, and there's all kinds of places that you can check mark off, traits and that. There's not a lot of difference. In fact, authentic leadership came from the transformational model. And why I haven't adopted it is because there's a problem that you can get in with an authentic leader, and that is they're going to do what they believe no matter what, which may not be always the best thing for the organization or the group, right? So I'm going to stay true to myself, which I'm a big believer in. However, I want to be true to the group. I want to be true to the organization. I want to be true to this. And the reason I got focused on transformational leadership is because I mentioned earlier that, for 50 years, I grew up in one model. It is the dominant thing. It is the command and control. It is the be powerful, be well-spoken, be this dominant feature. And for me, it was really a transformation to get to the place that I wanted to be. And I've got a story about how that transformation happened, but I don't want to make everybody cry. But there was a transformational aspect, and that's why I got focused on that word. But if you take a look at the leadership, most of the progressive leadership traits, you're going to see a lot of overlap. It's not like you're either this or you're this. And in fact, I'm going to suggest that one leadership style should not be the only way that you lead. For instance, there's a great time for a command and control leader to take place, right? If there's an emergency or time is up of the essence, you want a command and control leader. There's a fire in the building. You call 911. You give mouth to mouth to this person. You get everybody else out of the building, right? You want a command and control. We don't have time to get a committee and hear everyone's feelings. So in an emergency, there's a place for that command and control style. I think the Robert Greenleaf servant leadership model is great, but there's some drawbacks to that as well. That servant leader, I'm only here to serve, right? It creates a dependence upon others to always want your permission for things as well, too. So if you want to have access to the tool to say, hey, how many checkboxes do I get? I'm happy to provide that to anybody on the group as well. And I'll give you my email address later in this. But so not a lot of difference between old school and then some of these progressive styles, but there's a couple categories that, checkbox that say you're this versus that. Your go-to style is at least.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry to take up so much time.
I love questions. Anybody else? Okay, a couple resources. First of all, thank you for being here and actively participating. But there's a couple resources that we have down here. We do a podcast. My partner and I do a podcast, and we do it weekly. And it's called the CEO Podcast. And it started out as cocktails, entrepreneurs, and opportunity. But we got tired of sitting around drinking. What it really is the conversation between us around a cocktail table or a coffee table. It started out as I went over to this guy's house and we were just talking about life and things. And all of a sudden we started talking about business ideas, right? Business things that are happening in the workplace. And it was fun. I had a great time. And then the next week he came over to my place and sat in the backyard and we did the same thing. We started talking about, our families and this and that, just having a conversation with a friend. And we ended up talking about business things again. And in the middle of that second one, I said, people need to hear this conversation. So we decided to do a weekly podcast on conversations that matter to us. Every other one, we have a guest come in and talk as well. And again, it's just sitting around a cocktail table or sitting around a coffee table and the kind of conversations that people would have about trust and communication and leadership and emotional intelligence. And we just did one on quiet quitting, that whole concept that are going there. We do some human resources stuff. We do some, we have some nonprofits on once in a while and talking about their thing, but it's fun. It's called the CEO Podcast. There's a little QR code there. If you wanted to scan that, you could find us. We're on Apple, we're on YouTube, we're all over the place. And it's fun. So that's a free resource. The other thing is, if you wanted to get in touch with me for any reason, scott@leadtogoals.com. Just send me an email. I'll respond. Pick up the phone. I will talk. Right. And again, the things that we'll talk about end up being, I do retreat facilitation, executive coaching, courses in the workshop, any of these conversations, or basically, here's the thing. When you're working with me, I'm going to tell you up front. Nothing I'm going to tell you is going to be unique. Nothing's going to be new. Nothing you didn't already know. Everything we need to know in business, we learn by the time we're in kindergarten. All it is how to play in a sandbox. Different personalities, different techniques, different whatever, right? We're gonna have to deal with some of these folks that don't listen or don't share or don't all that. And my whole premise is how to reframe that into a place that we can put a positive spin and a way to get things done, becoming effective, not just efficient. All right. Again, I'm going to go back to this page here and let you have Scott at Lead to Goals and my phone number there. If anyone wants to get in touch for any reason, please be on the lookout in January for the book. We'll send emails out to those of you that we've captured those on coming up. I think it will take in depth what we talked about in just a brief half hour and give you something to challenge and debate. One of the things that I like though is when people have different ideas than me to challenge me and again, you are going to make me smarter with these questions and challenges. So please don't hesitate to bring up anything that says, yeah, that didn't resonate. Can you talk a little more about that? I'd love to have a conversation about any of those things. All right, before we sign off, any further questions? Don't be shy. All right. Thank you very much for the time. Again, email me, pick up the phone, give me a call if you'd like, and we could talk about any of the things that are happening with you, with your organization, or differences of opinion that we might have shared. I'm open to all of that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Scott. Terrific. So
All
much
right.
substance. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. I appreciate that.